Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is about United Flight 1175. And you want your flights to be, your flights to Hawaii to be all bunnies and puppies, and everybody's happy and everything goes nicely. A lot of people, they're going out for a honeymoon or a marriage or just a holiday. For a number of people, it can be the first time they're on an airplane. And there were a couple issues that kind of were unfortunate and led to a situation that should not have happened. And I look at three of them. They have to do with the certification of the cowl and the containment system, some errors in that, maintenance issues on the blade, and also the captain's handling in relation to addressing the flight attendants and the passengers considering this. Now, this was a flight from San Francisco out to Honolulu on February 13th, 2018. And the picture here, you may have seen this before in some of my presentations. This was my last flight out of Maui. And this aircraft actually 6 years later would be the one that that engine you're looking at had an issue with the cowl coming off there on a flight out of Denver. And I actually consider that flight out of Denver a much more critical flight as far as this engine scenario situation than 1175 going into Honolulu. And I'll explain that in just a minute. But I really enjoyed the 777, and it was one of my more favorite airplanes to fly. That and the 727 were my two favorite airliners to fly. And I ended my career on it. I had 13 years flying it. I was a line check airman. I had 8,000 hours roughly in it when I finally turned the APU off for the last time and walked out of the cockpit. Now, this kind of happened at I would say, the pinnacle of my career as far as doing ALPA work. I was chairman of the New Aircraft Committee. I'd had a background in flight test, and I was involved in a lot of aspects of the development, certification, and flight test of this aircraft. And it was an expert, a real privilege and experience to be involved in this. Now, this is one of the flight tests, me in the left seat there, of course, with much darker hair than I have now. You can see some flight test instrumentation up on the glare shield. And there's John Cashman, who was a chief test pilot on the 777. Now, John, an amazing guy, very, very soft-spoken, underrated, but one of the most knowledgeable, and one of the test pilots you've never heard of sort of thing, but one of the most knowledgeable, cool test pilots I've ever met. He had issues with in-flight test, some PIOs, and he had to actually put his feet up on the glare shield to steady the yoke and recover the aircraft. And there's another interesting tale where they were going to fly the 777 on its first flight with the brand new Pratt & Whitney engines. And John says, no, we don't do that. And yeah, they really wanted to, and just, no, we don't do that. So John insisted that they did the first flight on this new engine, carrying it on the 747 test bed. Now, they had a 747 test bed where you could mount, in place of typically engine number 3, you could mount an engine to test. And we did a lot of this out at Edwards. We had a GE 747 out there that they used for testing of engines and stuff like that. So it was a very common thing to put an engine on a 747 and go fly it. And there's a real interesting video, and I guess it's probably a Boeing video because I couldn't find it, of showing the 747 taking off. John was flying it, and that test engine going through some very violent compressor stalls. And it was kind of like, yeah, you were right, John. They needed to tweak this engine before we go fly it. It would not have been a good event if he would have done the first flight on the 777 and had single or even dual compressor stalls on takeoff. That would have been very bad. John very well earned his money. Now, I was the team leader on the ALPA working together team, and they actually, this was a different Boeing back then. They involved the test pilots in the design, the airline pilots, because airline pilots fly differently than test pilots, and we brought a number of things that we found in the operation that they had not seen before. Like one of the guys introduced a 3 hertz PIO on final, and there's a filter in there to take that out now. And, airline pilots fly differently than test pilots, and that PIO had not been seen before. So I was chairman of this group, and we had a great time working together with Boeing on the design, the flight test, and things like that. And as a result, I got a few awards for it. This actually had to do with a paper I wrote about the various flight control aspects of this of the design of Airbus and Boeing. And here's a group of us flying. This was the 777-300. I never got to fly it in actual airline service. I retired before it was commonly flown, but I did get to fly it in flight test. And that's me at the upper left, and my team members next to me. And John Cashman is on the bottom right there. He was now the head of flight test, and Frank Santonia is next to him, who was the 777-300 chief test pilot. And there's a nice little letter I got from Boeing. Okay, like I said, it's a different company. They don't care for pilots' inputs now, but they were very grateful back then, and it was a very rewarding time. Okay, enough about all that. I want to tell you about my background, so I've got a bit of a background in this. Now let's get to this situation with 1175. Now it probably couldn't have happened at a better time. They're just approaching top of descent into Honolulu, and this thing let loose. Now, these are rare events. They're not unheard of. They've happened. There's been a long history of them over decades. If you lose a fan blade, it's going to get your attention, and it did. And it was not contained, and I'll talk about that in a second, because that's the whole issue of okay, you design it to be contained, but being a test pilot and engineer, okay, show me. We'll believe the engineers, but you always have that little bit back of the mind. Well, did they really do it right? And there was certain parts of this certification that were not the best handled, and I'll discuss that in a second. But anyway, they had this event. Okay, it's a noticeable event. It will get your attention. And they basically shut down the engine. They had some minor damage. NTSB classified it as minor damage to the leading edge of the wing there and the horizontal stabilizer. And basically, it was a shut the engine down, do a drift down, engine failure checklist procedure, and you take it on into Honolulu and land. Pretty straightforward. You're in a lightweight condition, into flight. The other flight, United 328, in my opinion, was a much more serious situation, because that was on takeoff. High altitude, heavy weight departure, because you're at full gross weight here. You're going from Denver to Honolulu, and I've flown that trip before. And you have a 16,000-foot runway there at Denver, the longest in the country. It even exceeds Edwards at 15,000 feet, which I consider the longest. Of course, that's not counting the lake beds, which are much longer, but I digress. Anyway, you've got a long runway, and I've used all of that runway to get airborne on this flight. So fortunately, it didn't happen at V1. They had a little bit of energy up and airborne in a way, but this was in a much more serious situation or realm of flight than top of descent going in. Now, I have complained for a very long time that when we go into the simulator and we have engine failures, they are very mundane. It's just the engine goes down, and you get a little bit of yaw there, and you have to counteract it. But I said, I've had 20 engine failures, and most of them were in flight test, and I have had 3 at United. A couple of them, when the turbine section comes apart, you get very noticeable vibration. It shakes the whole aircraft. Everybody in back knows something is going on. And I said, when we get them in the simulator, they're just a non-event. Most of my engine failures were events. Now, I had a few on the DC-10 where it sheared the tower shaft and just stopped pumping fuel into the engine. That's essentially the equivalent of just shutting down the engine. So, okay, that was a non-event, other than the yaw kick, which was prominent because we were at climb power, climbing out. But other ones, other than an engine fire where I actually shut down the engine, looking at seeing the flames coming out of the cowling, that gets your attention, but it's not anything that shakes the airplane as such. But my complaint was, you guys make these engine failures too vanilla, and you got to stress to pilots that, hey, if one of these engines comes apart, it's gonna get your attention. And as a captain, you should know this. You should be aware of it. Now, unfortunately, with this flight crew, the captain was fairly, I would say, inexperienced. Now, I always considered myself a low time pilot. I retired with 23,000 hours, and I flew in the military as an instructor. So we'd fly an hour mission. Flight test missions, they could be an hour or a lot less. You take off, you go up, you drop a weapon, you come back and land. It's a short mission. So I didn't get a lot of flight time in the military. I got hired at 1,600 hours, and that's adding on extra time for taxi, which the military didn't count. Okay, so now I'm in the airlines and I'm doing a lot of meetings and flight test stuff, so I'm not getting much flight time as a lot of people, so I thought I had kind of low time. Well, the captain was 57 years old, and he had 13,000 hours of flight time, which to me is a little light. Now, the thing is, he had 360 hours in the 777, so he's a new guy. He's got like half a year of experience in it. Fortunately, he had a very experienced first officer who had 10,000 hours in the 777. So I'm sure that first officer was a lot of help there, being very experienced, and that's one thing I always enjoyed when I flew the larger aircraft. Is you would typically have co-pilots who had been, some of them even had been previous captains, unlike the 737, and they had a lot of experience, and they were very helpful, and it made being a captain on the wide bodies very easy. But let's talk about these fan blades. Now that's me standing in the engine there with a British Airways pilot. That's me on the right side of the picture there. Those fan blades are big. And when those little suckers come apart, you've got an event. Those big fan blades are about 42 inches long, 22 inches at the tip up there. Those suckers are big, and they weigh about 35 pounds. Okay, so here's the engine. Fan blade failed at the root here and separated. And you can see the containment ring there is largely intact, but it moved forward and took out the cowl section, and the blade was not contained. Here's a picture after they got to the gate, and yeah, that's going to get the attention of the mechanics. All right, so here's another picture. It shows where the fan blade number 11 separated at the root, and there was some collateral damage to fan blade number 10 there. Now, like I said, the 777 is a great aircraft. It handles well. It flies well. You can have these situations. They're very rare, but they're certainly not unheard of. But the cowl here, originally this was an aluminum cowl, and they went and they had they changed the cowling to a carbon fiber reinforced plastic. Now, I've seen some of the video of these tests where they actually separate a blade at high speed, and that cowling really moves around. And part of the way it contains the engine failure is that the cowling actually absorbs the blade hitting it, and the distortion is pretty big. Well, the composite one here, which they just assumed was equivalent. I love these assumptions here. So that's the first issue, is assuming that you could change the cowling material and it would be just as good. They should have probably really tested it to be sure, because they analyzed later that the carbon fiber cowling would move a lot more than the aluminum one, and that could subject it to air loads that resulted in it fracturing and failing and departing. All right, so here we go. We've got a ratchet mark, an internal failure here. Now they use dye penetrant, and anybody who's ever had an airplane, they're used to that, where you put dye on a structure, and you can see if the dye penetrates, it makes a crack show up. Well, they also used a ultrasonic thermal test, which even though this blade had been through overhaul twice, and I think it had like 77,000 hours on it, what they do is they apply ultrasonics to it, and if you've got a crack, it causes the plates to move back and forth, and it heats up, and you can see a thermal image. Well, they did see a thermal image, and this thing was still in development, this procedure, so it wasn't completely vetted, more or less, and they were deficient in training in some aspects, because they had to get the blades out, and they didn't have time to go through various training that was needed to keep themselves current. And another aspect of this is you're looking for thermal images. Well, the NTSB criticized the testing procedure because they had windows that were letting in heat in. The room was not kept as cool as it should have been, and it was possible to have light shining on these things that would cause a thermal imaging issue because you've got sunlight on the blade. They did actually see the crack in the analysis, but they assumed it was a paint issue and just let it go. Now here's the old flight tracker. You can see where it was 37 minutes out, and at top of descent they had this issue. It was a very noticeable event. You got a right roll out of it, obviously rolling into the engine that had the higher drag situation. They shut it down. Now, I've had a lot of situations. I haven't had this particular one, but I've had engine problems, gear problems, and stuff like that. And one thing you have to do as captain, especially when you have an event that everybody is going to notice in the cabin, you can't just gloss over it and ignore it. And especially when you get down there and everybody asks, why are there fire trucks surrounding the aircraft? So you need to address these issues. And part of the thing you need to do as a captain is you need to talk to your flight attendants, and you need to talk to your people, and you need to tell them that, hey, this is under control, we're handling it, and just sue them, because you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be in very serious discomfort. So the nice, cool captain's voice come on. And I've come on and I've told people, hey, we've got a problem with the engine, and I know this may be the first time you've ever experienced it. It's not for me. I've had actually a number of these before, and we're going to go back in. We're going to land. And that soothes the people, because they want to know that, hey, you're experienced. You got the thing under control. You hear it in the voice of the captain, which they need to hear to be reassured, and that, you're going to be fine. Not to talk to the people or even the flight attendants for 30 minutes. Worst case here, if this thing had really been bad and you thought you weren't going to make the island, you might have to prepare for ditch, and then you're going to have to talk to the flight attendants. But okay, not to talk to them or the passengers is not a good event. And that was reported by the CVR recordings, that there was no conversation with the captain and the passengers or the crew. Now, there's another unfortunate thing that, okay, we're not all Chuck Yeagers. We can't all be absolutely the coolest dude there. But for the sake of the passengers, you do have to portray that image just to make them calm. And okay, so a guy from California and Guam, he files a PTSD type of lawsuit, and because the captain made a comment describing the engine failure as aircraft experienced what felt like hitting a brick wall at 500 miles per hour. Okay, well, that's a little bit of hyperbole and aggressiveness there, excessiveness there, and no, you don't want to make statements like that. Okay, you just don't. And here's a picture of the fan blade again, and you can see they're hollow for cooling, by the way, if you didn't know that. But these are a large structure. And here's a picture on approach coming in, and you can see the depiction of the cowling there, and obviously as the fan blade separated and took out portions of the cowling, that's where the portions of the carbon fiber reinforced plastic are missing. So anyway, that's my comments on this event, the issues with testing and certification, and the way it could have probably been handled better to reassure the passengers more. Anyway, that's my comments as an airline pilot, etc. I hope you found it informative. Thanks for watching.